Hey, Reddit. I'm here to share a story I never thought I'd be telling. If someone had told me a few years ago that I'd be sitting at my desk, pouring out my heart to a bunch of strangers on the internet, I would have laughed it off. But here I am, broken and lost, hoping to find some solace in your comments. I'm Mark, and until recently, I was married to a woman named Emily. From the outside, we looked like the perfect couple. We were that duo everyone thought would last forever. The ones who made it through college sweethearts, built a home together, and hosted Thanksgiving dinners that made our friends jealous. Emily was beautiful, confident, and had this magnetic charm that drew everyone in. She'd light up a room the moment she stepped in, and I was the guy lucky enough to call her my wife. Our first few years together were pure bliss. We traveled the world, laughed until we cried, and made promises to each other that I thought were unbreakable. I thought I'd won the marriage lottery. But as time went on, subtle cracks began to form in our relationship. Cracks I ignored or explained away because I trusted her. But those cracks were the first signs of the storm brewing underneath the surface. It all started last year when Emily landed her dream job at a major tech company as a project manager. I remember the pride in her eyes when she got the news. We celebrated that night with champagne and takeout from her favorite restaurant. I thought her new job would be great for us, that it would make her happier. And it did, but not in the way I expected. Slowly, things began to change. Emily started coming home later and later, always claiming she was swamped with work. At first, I believed her. I knew how demanding her new position was, and I didn't want to be the clingy husband who demanded all her time. But then the excuses started piling up. I have a late meeting. I need to stay over at a colleague's place. Or, I'm going on a last-minute work trip. Each time she told me one of these, she'd say it with an annoyed sigh, as if I was some burden she had to reassure. I tried to keep it together, convincing myself that everything was fine. But then there were other changes. Smaller things that seemed insignificant on their own, but together they painted a different picture. She began dressing differently, putting on outfits that were way too glamorous for an office setting. Her perfume became more expensive, and she'd spend hours getting ready even on weekends when she said she was just meeting a client. Our conversations grew strained. Whenever I asked her about work, she'd deflect, saying I wouldn't understand or that it wasn't worth discussing. I started to feel like a stranger in my own marriage, but every time I tried to bring up my concerns, she'd shut me down with a dismissive wave. "Mark, don't be so insecure," she'd say with a condescending smile. "You're better than that. I'm just busy." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she was still the woman I fell in love with, but deep down, a gnawing suspicion began to grow. It got to the point where I couldn't sleep at night, my mind racing with all the what-ifs. Was she really working late? Or was she somewhere else? Who was she with? What was she hiding? But the breaking point, the moment that shattered the fragile hope I was clinging to, came when I received a message from Emily's best friend, Jessica. It was completely out of the blue, and to be honest, I didn't even know Jessica had my number. We were friendly enough, but she and Emily were the ones who were really close. That's why I almost didn't read it, thinking it was some accidental text. But when I saw her words, I felt the ground disappear beneath me. "Hey, Mark, I don't know if I should be telling you this, but I can't stay quiet anymore. Emily's been seeing another man. She's been bragging about it to our friends and laughing at you behind your back. I thought you deserved to know." I read the message over and over, trying to make sense of it. Emily? Cheating? Bragging about it? Laughing at me? No, there had to be some mistake. Maybe Jessica was just stirring up drama. But then she sent a series of screenshots, messages between Emily and some guy named Steve. And suddenly, everything clicked. The texts were brutal. Emily was complaining about how I was too emotional and too needy, saying how she felt suffocated in our marriage. She said she couldn't wait to be free of me, that she was tired of pretending. But the worst part? There was a message where she outright called me a pathetic excuse for a husband. My hands started to shake as I scrolled through the messages. There were photos too. Emily and this Steve guy out at restaurants, in hotel lobbies, even at the beach. She wasn't just hiding an affair. She was flaunting it, making a mockery of me in front of her friends. And they all knew. They knew she was cheating, and they laughed along with her. I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred as a wave of nausea hit me. I stumbled to the bathroom and threw up, bile burning my throat. How long had this been going on? How many nights had she come home to me, looked me in the eyes, and lied through her teeth? I felt like a fool, no worse. I felt like a joke. Emily's private little joke. When I finally managed to calm down, I messaged Jessica back, still desperate to find some explanation that made sense. Are you sure? Are you 100% sure? I typed, my fingers trembling. Jessica's response was immediate. Yes, Mark. I've seen them together. They're more than just friends. I didn't want to believe it either, but I can't let her treat you like this. You deserve better. Better? What did that even mean? I didn't want better. I wanted my wife back. I wanted my life back. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the woman I wanted back was just a figment of my imagination. Emily was never going to be the wife I thought she was. She had changed, or maybe she'd always been like this, and I was just too blind to see it. I spent the next few days in a daze, stumbling through work and life like a zombie. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those messages, heard her cruel words echoing in my mind. Pathetic, crybaby, weak. Was that really how she saw me? Was I really that worthless in her eyes? Then, as if things couldn't get worse, I found out something else that made my blood run cold. Through some mutual acquaintances, I learned that Steve wasn't just some random guy she'd met at work. He was a married man. He had a family, 2 kids, a wife of his own. And Emily knew. She knew and didn't care. It was like being hit with a second sledgehammer. Not only had Emily betrayed me, but she was helping to destroy another family in the process. How could she do this? How could she be so heartless? I wanted to confront her right away, to demand answers. But I held back. I knew I needed more proof, something concrete that would force her to admit the truth. So I did what I thought I'd never do. I hired a private investigator. I spent hours talking to him, showing him the messages, explaining the situation. He was sympathetic but professional, assuring me he'd get me everything I needed. The next 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I barely functioned, existing in a fog of anger, heartbreak, and anxiety. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart leaped, hoping it was the investigator with new information. And when he finally called me in for a meeting, I was both relieved and terrified. Mark, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, he said, sliding a folder across the table. But you were right. Your wife is definitely having an affair, and it's worse than you think. I opened the folder with trembling hands, and there they were, photos of Emily and Steve together, holding hands, kissing, disappearing into hotels. But it was the video that broke me. In it, Emily and Steve were sitting at a cafe, laughing and talking. And then I heard her voice, clear as day. I can't wait to see the look on his face when I finally leave. He's so weak, Jess. Such a pathetic crybaby. I almost feel bad for him. Almost. I slammed the folder shut, my chest heaving. That was it. That was the moment I knew there was no going back. My wife, the woman I'd loved for so many years, was gone. And all that was left was a heartless monster wearing her face. After seeing that video, something inside me snapped. All the pain, confusion, and heartbreak I'd been feeling turned into a burning fury I didn't even know I was capable of. I had spent weeks, no, months, suffering in silence while Emily lived her double life without a care in the world. She laughed at me, mocked me to her friends, and paraded her affair partner around like she was proud of it. And now I had it all on video. It was time to put an end to this madness. I waited until Emily came home that evening. I was sitting at the dining table, the folder from the private investigator placed neatly in front of me. When she walked in, she barely glanced at me, her eyes flicking to the folder with mild curiosity. "What's that?" she asked, her tone flat, almost bored. I looked up at her, my gaze unwavering. "Sit down, Emily." She arched an eyebrow, her lips curling into a smirk. "Wow, Mark, you're sounding almost authoritative. What's gotten into you? Sit down, I repeated, my voice cold and firm. She rolled her eyes but complied, dropping her purse onto a chair and taking a seat across from me. She folded her arms and leaned back, looking at me with that same arrogant smile I'd come to despise. The smile that told me she thought she was in control. "What's this all about?" she asked, her tone dripping with disdain. "If this is some pathetic attempt to get me to talk or reconnect, I'm not in the mood." "Is that what you think?" I asked quietly. "You think I want to reconnect?" She shrugged, her smile widening. "Oh, I know you do. You've been trying so hard, haven't you? The romantic dinners, the long talks. You're desperate, Mark. Desperate to hold on to something that's already dead." The venom in her words hit me like a slap in the face, but I didn't flinch. I held her gaze, the anger simmering just below the surface. "What's dead, Emily, is my patience," I said slowly, "and my tolerance for your bullshit." Her eyes narrowed, the smile slipping slightly. "Excuse me?" I pushed the folder across the table toward her. "Go ahead. Open it." She glanced down at the folder, her expression guarded now. With a slight frown, she flipped it open. I watched her face as she skimmed through the photos and documents, her eyes widening as she realized what she was looking at. But when she got to the last few pages, the ones with the screenshots of her texts and the transcript of the video, her expression twisted into something ugly. "You had me followed?" she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. I nodded, my gaze steady. "I did. I needed proof. And now I have it." For a long moment, she just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing as if she were struggling to find the right words. But then, to my utter disbelief, she laughed. A harsh, mocking laugh that sent chills down my spine. "You pathetic, spineless coward," she spat, slamming the folder shut. "You went through all this trouble just to confirm what you already knew? You could have just asked me, you know? I would have told you I was seeing someone else." My jaw clenched, the fury bubbling up inside me. "And would you have told me how you mocked me to your friends? How you laughed at me behind my back? How you called me a pathetic crybaby who couldn't satisfy you?" She didn't even blink. "Yeah, I probably would have. Because that's the truth, Mark. You are pathetic. You've been clinging to me like a lost puppy for years, thinking I'd just stick around because you were nice to me." I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "I've been nothing but a good husband to you. I loved you, Emily. I gave you everything, my time, my support, my heart. And you threw it all away for what? For some cheap affair with a guy who's married with kids." Her smile faded, replaced by a look of cold indifference. "I threw it away because I was bored. Because you bored me. Because you're not a man, Mark. You're a doormat. And no woman wants to stay married to a doormat." I stared at her, my chest heaving with suppressed rage. How could she say that so casually? How could she act like this was all my fault? Like I was the one who had driven her to cheat? "Then why didn't you just leave?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Why stay with me if I was so unbearable?" "Because I didn't have to leave," she said with a smirk. "I got everything I wanted. A nice house, a comfortable life, and a clueless husband who wouldn't dare question me. It was perfect. And you know what's funny?" She leaned forward, her eyes glittering with malice. "Even if you knew, I didn't think you'd have the guts to do anything about it." My vision blurred with anger. I could feel my hands trembling, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. But I forced myself to stay calm, to keep my voice steady. "You're right about one thing," I said softly. "I didn't have the guts before, but I do now." Before she could respond, I pulled out my phone and opened a video. The video? The one where she and Steve sat in the cafe, laughing at me. I turned the screen toward her and pressed play. Her eyes widened as she heard her own voice. "I can't wait to see the look on his face when I finally leave. He's so weak, Jess. Such a pathetic crybaby. I almost feel bad for him. Almost." I paused the video, watching as the color drained from her face. "You think this is a game?" I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You think I'm just going to roll over, and let you walk all over me? For the first time, Emily looked uncertain. She glanced at the video, then back at me, her confidence wavering. What are you going to do? I already did it, I said calmly. That video, along with all the messages, photos, and proof of your affair, is now public. Everyone knows, Emily. Your friends, your family, your coworkers. They all know who you really are. Her face went pale. You're lying. Am I? I pulled up the link to the post I'd made, showing her the flood of comments pouring in. People were outraged, disgusted, calling her out for her behavior. I had even tagged Steve's wife in the post, ensuring that she saw every last bit of evidence. You ruined our marriage, Emily. You made a joke out of me. So now I've made a joke out of you. She stared at the screen, her hands shaking. You can't do this, she whispered. I'll lose everything. That's the idea, I said coldly. You made me suffer. Now it's your turn. And then, without another word, I walked out of the house, leaving her sitting there, staring at the mess she'd made of our lives. I wish I could say I felt triumphant as I left Emily that day, that I felt some sense of satisfaction for finally standing up for myself. But the truth is, I felt hollow, empty. The woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with, had turned into someone I couldn't even recognize. And now, there was no going back. The fallout was immediate. Emily's friends began messaging me, some furious, others apologetic. Her parents called, demanding to know what had happened. I told them the truth and sent them all the evidence. They were horrified, but what could they say? Their daughter had done something unforgivable. As for Steve, he showed up at my house a few days later, his face twisted with rage. He yelled, cursed, even tried to take a swing at me. But I didn't flinch. I told him to take it up with Emily and walked away, leaving him seething in my driveway. The divorce was swift and brutal. Emily tried to fight for a share of our assets, but with all the evidence I had, she didn't stand a chance. I got the house, the cars, and most of our savings. She walked away with almost nothing. But even as I signed the final papers, I didn't feel victorious. I felt broken, like I had won a battle that wasn't worth fighting. I thought that would be the end of it, that Emily would disappear from my life, and I'd finally be able to move on. But then something happened that turned everything upside down. One night, months after the divorce was finalized, I got a message from Jessica. We need to talk, she wrote. It's about Emily. Please call me. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. What could Jessica possibly want now? But something told me I needed to hear her out. When I called her, her voice was tight with anxiety. Mark, I don't know how to say this, but Emily's not done. She's trying to ruin you. She's been telling people you're a psycho, that you're dangerous. What? I asked, my voice rising. Why would she do that? Because she's desperate, Jessica continued, her voice trembling. People are turning against her, Mark. After you exposed everything, her reputation's in shambles. She's been fired from her job, and Steve's wife filed for divorce. She's losing everything, and she's blaming you. I leaned back in my chair, a bitter smile forming on my lips. Blaming me? She did this to herself, Jessica. She's the one who cheated and lied. All I did was tell the truth. I know, Jessica said quickly, but that's not how she sees it. She thinks you're out to destroy her life, and now she's spreading rumors that you're dangerous, that you threatened her. Mark, I think she's trying to get a restraining order against you. I felt a chill run down my spine. A restraining order? That could ruin everything for me. My job, my relationships, everything I'd worked so hard to keep together after the divorce. And for what? So Emily could play the victim? What do? I asked quietly, feeling the familiar sense of helplessness creeping in. You need to be careful, Jessica warned. Stay away from her. Don't give her any reason to accuse you of anything. She's spiraling, and she'll do whatever it takes to turn this around. Just watch your back, okay? I thanked Jessica and hung up, my mind racing. I couldn't believe it. After everything she'd done, Emily was still trying to twist the narrative, still trying to paint herself as the victim and me as the villain. It was sickening, but I wasn't going to let her win. I wasn't going to let her destroy what little I had left. So I did what Jessica suggested. I kept my distance, made sure to have an alibi for every moment of every day, and documented everything. And sure enough, a few weeks later, I received a letter from Emily's lawyer claiming that I had been harassing her and that she was seeking a restraining order. I fought it, of course. I had the evidence to prove I hadn't gone near her or contacted her in any way. The judge saw right through her lies, and her request was denied. But that wasn't the end of it. Emily kept pushing, kept trying to drag me through the mud. She filed complaint after complaint, each one more outlandish than the last. At one point, she even claimed I had broken into her new apartment, despite the fact that I had never set foot near it. It was exhausting. Every time I thought it was over, she found some new way to come at me. And as much as I hated to admit it, part of me wondered if she'd ever stop, if she'd ever just let me go. But then, out of nowhere, something happened that changed everything. One evening, I was sitting at home, trying to relax after another grueling day at work, when I received an unexpected knock at the door. I opened it to find a man standing on my porch, a somber look on his face. "Are you Mark?" he asked, his voice low. "Yeah, that's me," I replied cautiously. "Who are you?" "My name's Adam," he said quietly. "I'm Steve's brother." I blinked, stunned. Steve's brother? What was he doing here? I hadn't heard anything about Steve since that last confrontation in my driveway months ago. Okay, I said slowly. "What can I do for you?" He hesitated, glancing down at the ground before meeting my gaze. "I think you need to know something. It's about Emily and Steve." My heart sank. I had thought I was done with this nightmare, but clearly I was wrong. "What about them?" "It's bad," Adam said softly. "Really bad. Steve, he's gone. He left town. No one's heard from him in weeks." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process what he was saying. "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" "I mean he packed up and disappeared," Adam explained. "He didn't tell anyone where he was going, not even his kids. And the worst part? He took a bunch of money from his company before he left. Embezzled it. The cops are looking for him." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. Embezzlement? Disappeared? What the hell was going on? "But what does this have to do with me?" I asked, still reeling from the news. "Everything," Adam said grimly. "Steve blamed you for everything that happened. He told everyone that you were the reason his life fell apart, that you were out to destroy him. And Emily, she's been helping him. They were planning to run away together, but something must have gone wrong." I shook my head, unable to believe what I was hearing. Emily? Running away with him? But she's still here, still trying to ruin my life. "That's just it," Adam said quietly. "She's not here anymore. She's gone too." My heart stopped. "What do you mean, gone?" "She's missing, Mark," Adam whispered. "She disappeared the same day Steve did. The cops think they're together, but no one knows for sure." I stumbled back, the room spinning around me. This couldn't be happening. Emily, gone? After all this time, after everything she put me through, she had just vanished? "I thought you should know," Adam said softly, "because the police are probably going to want to talk to you. They think you might know something." I stared at him, my mind racing. "But I don't. I don't know anything." "I believe you," he said, his gaze steady. "But they're desperate, Mark. Desperate people do desperate things. Just be careful, okay?" With that, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there in shock. The next few weeks were a blur of confusion and anxiety. The police did show up at my door, asking me question after question about Emily and Steve. They seemed convinced that I knew more than I was letting on, but I told them the truth. I hadn't seen or heard from either of them since the divorce. The whole situation was surreal. Emily and Steve, gone without a trace? It felt like something out of a movie, not real life. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized just how little I knew about what had been going on behind the scenes. One night, I decided to take a look at the files the private investigator had given me again. I had been so focused on the affair that I hadn't paid much attention to the details. But as I pored over the photos and transcripts, something jumped out at me. There was a message from Steve to Emily, dated just a few days before they disappeared. In it, he mentioned something about the money and how they had to act fast before he finds out. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, assuming it was just some petty scheme of theirs. But now, with everything that had happened, it seemed like a crucial piece of the puzzle. What money? Who was he? And why had they disappeared so suddenly? I reached out to Jessica, hoping she might have some answers. We met up at a small diner on the outskirts of town, and I showed her the message. "What do you make of this?" I asked, sliding the paper across the table. She read it carefully, her brow furrowing. "I don't know, Mark. This doesn't sound like the Steve I knew. He was always careful, always calculated. He wouldn't have just run off without a plan. So what's your theory?" I pressed. Jessica hesitated, biting her lip. I think someone else was involved. Someone bigger. And they got scared." "Scared?" I repeated, my heart pounding. "Scared of what?" She looked me dead in the eye, her expression serious. "Scared of you." Jessica's words hung in the air like a dark cloud. Scared of me? I couldn't wrap my head around it. What did they have to be scared of? I was just an ordinary guy who got caught in a nightmare of lies and deceit. I didn't have power or influence. I wasn't a threat. But the look in Jessica's eyes told me she believed it. And that sent a shiver down my spine. "Jessica, I'm not dangerous," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm just a guy who wanted his life back." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "But that's just it, Mark. You're not dangerous by yourself. But you have something they thought they could control. And when you didn't crumble like they expected, they panicked." I stared at her, completely lost. "What are you talking about? What do I have?" Jessica glanced around, as if expecting someone to jump out of the shadows at any moment. "Your proof. Your evidence. You exposed Emily. But what if that wasn't just about an affair? What if there was more going on? Something that Steve and Emily didn't want anyone to know?" "Like what?" I asked, feeling a knot of dread forming in my stomach. "Money laundering? Fraud? I don't know, Mark. But Steve was involved in some shady business deals. He had connections, people who wouldn't take kindly to him running off with their money. And now, with him gone, they're looking for answers. And who's the one person who exposed everything? You." I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. This couldn't be real. It sounded like something out of a crime thriller, not my life. But the more I thought about it, the more everything started to make a twisted sort of sense. The sudden disappearance, the cryptic messages, Emily's desperation to ruin me. It was all connected. "So what do I do?" I whispered, my voice shaking. "You need to find out what they were really up to," Jessica said urgently, "before they come after you. Because if you have information they want, they won't stop until they get it." My heart pounded in my chest. This was insane, but I knew she was right. I couldn't just sit around waiting for the other shoe to drop. I had to take control of the situation, or I'd end up as another casualty in whatever dangerous game Emily and Steve had been playing. "Okay," I said finally, taking a deep breath. "Where do I start?" Jessica's gaze softened, and she reached out to squeeze my hand. "I'll help you, Mark. We'll figure this out together. Just be careful. I don't want anything to happen to you." That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with questions and fears I couldn't quiet. I kept thinking about that message from Steve. Act fast before he finds out. Who was he talking about? Who was this mysterious he? And what had Emily and Steve done to make someone so dangerous come after them? The next morning, I began my investigation in earnest. I scoured through all the files I had, looking for any clue that might point me in the right direction. But everything seemed so ordinary. Until I stumbled upon an email thread between Steve and a man named Harris. The emails were vague, filled with business jargon and coded language that I couldn't quite decipher. But one phrase stood out: "The assets have been transferred as instructed. Ensure there are no loose ends." Loose ends? My heart sank as I realized what that meant. I was a loose end, and now they were probably looking for a way to tie me up for good. I decided to reach out to Steve's brother, Adam, hoping he might have some insight into his brother's shady dealings. We met up at a secluded park, away from prying eyes. Adam, I need to know everything, I said, desperation creeping into my voice. What was Steve involved in? Who was he dealing with? Adam looked uncomfortable, his gaze shifting around as if he were afraid someone might be watching. Mark, I don't know much. Steve kept his business separate from the family. But I do know he was working with some very dangerous people. They're not the kind of people you cross and walk away from. Then why did he run? I asked, frustrated. Why risk everything? Because he thought he could get away with it, Adam said bitterly. He thought he was smarter than them. But now, with him gone, they're going to start looking for someone to blame. I swallowed hard, fear clawing at my throat. And that someone is me. Adam nodded grimly. You exposed them, Mark. Even if it was unintentional, you brought attention to things they wanted kept hidden. If I were you, I'd get out of town. Lay low until this blows over. I shook my head. No, I'm not running. I need to find out what Emily and Steve were doing. I need to end this. Adam stared at me for a long moment, then sighed. If you're determined to do this, there's someone you should talk to. He used to work with Steve, kind of a fixer. Name's Tom, but be careful. He's not exactly the friendly type. I thanked Adam and got the contact information for Tom. But as I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was getting in way over my head. This was no longer just about Emily's betrayal. This was something bigger, something dangerous. But I had to know the truth. I had to put an end to this once and for all. I reached out to Tom the next day, using the burner phone Adam had given me. The line clicked open, and a gruff voice answered. Who is this? My name's Mark, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Adam said you might be able to help me. There was a long pause on the other end. Adam? Yeah, I know him. What do you want? I need information, I said quickly, about Steve and Emily. I know they were involved in something shady, and I think someone's coming after me because of it. Tom sighed heavily. You're playing a dangerous game, kid. Steve and Emily were idiots. They got greedy, thought they could outsmart the people they were working for. Now they're gone, and the people left holding the bag are the ones who are gonna pay. Please, I said desperately. I need to know what they did. I need to know how to make it stop. Another pause, then a low chuckle. You really want to know the truth, huh? Fine. But don't say I didn't warn you. He agreed to meet me at a rundown bar on the outskirts of town. When I walked in, I spotted him immediately, a burly man with a scar running down the side of his face. He looked me up and down as I approached, then motioned for me to sit. You've got guts, kid, he said, his eyes narrowing. I'll give you that. But guts won't keep you alive. I need answers, I said firmly. Tell me what I'm dealing with. Tom leaned back in his chair, his gaze piercing. Steve and Emily were involved in a money laundering scheme. They were using their positions to funnel money for some very bad people, people who don't take kindly to being double-crossed. When Steve started skimming off the top, they found out. They would have killed him on the spot, but then you exposed the affair. That bought him time, distracted them, but it also put a target on your back. I felt my stomach drop. So, what do I do? You lay low, Tom said bluntly. Disappear for a while. But if you're serious about ending this, there's one more thing you need to know. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small flash drive, sliding it across the table. This has everything. Bank transfers, emails, names of everyone involved. It's enough to blow the whole operation wide open. You take this to the authorities, and you might just survive. I stared at the flash drive, my mind racing. This was it, the key to everything. But did I really want to go down this path? Did I want to put myself at even greater risk? Why are you giving me this? I asked suspiciously. What's in it for you? Tom smirked. Let's just say I have my own reasons for wanting to see these bastards go down. But make no mistake. Once you open that can of worms, there's no going back. You'll have a lot of powerful people gunning for you. I swallowed hard and nodded. I understand. Good, Tom said, standing up. Then I wish you luck, kid. You're gonna need it. I watched him walk out of the bar, clutching the flash drive tightly in my hand. This was it, the moment of truth. I had the power to bring everything to light, to expose Emily and Steve's crimes, and take down the people they'd been working for. But at what cost? The next morning, I drove to the police station, my heart pounding in my chest. I sat in the car for what felt like an eternity, staring at the flash drive. All I had to do was hand it over, and it would be over. But as I reached for the door handle, my phone buzzed with a text. Unknown number. Think carefully about your next move, Mark. There are things worse than death. We're watching. I felt my blood run cold. They knew. They were watching me. I glanced around, panic rising. How could they have known so quickly? Was Tom in on it? Was this all a setup? My hands trembled as I started the car and drove away, my mind racing. I had to make a choice. I could go to the authorities, risk everything, and maybe, come out alive. Or I could disappear, leave everything behind, and try to start over somewhere far away. But there was one thing I knew for sure. I wasn't going to let Emily win. She had already taken so much from me. My marriage, my dignity, my peace of mind. I wasn't going to let her ruin what was left of my life. I pulled over to the side of the road and took a deep breath. Slowly, I inserted the flash drive into my laptop and opened the files. As I scanned through the documents, I felt a grim determination settle over me. I knew what I had to do. With shaking hands, I composed an email and attached the files, sending them to every major news outlet, law enforcement agency, and government official I could think of. I didn't care if they found me. I didn't care if I had to run for the rest of my life. Because in that moment, I knew I had won. No matter what happened next, I had exposed the truth. Emily, Steve, and everyone involved would face the consequences of their actions. And as for me, I'd finally be free. Bye.